From us, I'll be back with all the latest news at 10, but now on BBC One it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Goodbye.
Hello, good evening. I'm Roger Johnson. Welcome to a special edition of Northwest Tonight. This evening we are live in Manchester as the final report is published from the public inquiry into the terror attack which happened at this city's arena. It was published today.
From top to bottom, MI5 to the associates of the attacker, we will always believe that you all played a part in the murder of our children.
The fury of the families as it's revealed that the murderer might have been stopped, but MI5 missed a significant opportunity.
The reason for this missed opportunity included a failure by the security service, in my view, to act swiftly enough.
And we'll hear from the mosque, just a few miles from here, which the report said tried to distance itself from the bomber. Night has just fallen across Manchester, darkness shrouding this city, almost 6 years on from its darkest night. 22 people murdered, hundreds more maimed by a man who grew up just 4 miles in that direction, in this city, the city that he called home. Today, the final report of the public inquiry into what happened here on the night of the 22nd of May 2017 was published, and it concluded that he might have been stopped. But MI5 missed a significant opportunity and the security services were too slow. 3 reports have been written after the 18-month public inquiry, which took 194 days of evidence from 267 witnesses. In total, those 3 volumes add up to more than 1,200 pages. Volume 1 looked at those in charge on the night, their failings, the lax security and their failure to react when a threat was identified. Volume 2, so thick it requires 2 binders, was scathing in its criticism of the emergency services response. And then today, the 3rd and final volume, more failings. As Sir John Saunders said, the terrorist could have been stopped. Phil McCann reports.
A missed opportunity that might have stopped Salman Abedi killing 22 people and injuring hundreds of others who went to a concert in the city where he grew up.
I have found a significant missed opportunity to take action that might have prevented the attack.
Until 4 days before the attack, Salman Abedi was in Libya. The inquiry heard he'd probably previously been involved in fighting in the civil war there alongside his family. MI5 had information that he'd been affiliated to an extremist group.
There was a realistic possibility that actionable intelligence could have been obtained which might have led to action preventing the attack.
This is all about what happened when Abedi arrived in Manchester from Libya. At the airport, he got into a cart that had been used to store explosives. Sir John concluded 2 pieces of intelligence could have led to that car being followed. We don't know what the intelligence was because that part of the report isn't public. It could also have led to a port stop where police would have questioned Abedi when he landed.
If they had put a ports action on, we would have acted on that. You know, as we've discussed or has been discussed in a number of times, we never know what we might find, but the possibility is there.
Sir John said there was a communication breakdown between North West Counter-Terror Police and MI5, meaning the intelligence wasn't shared. He said MI5 failed to act swiftly enough. All very hard to hear for the families of the 22. Caroline lost her son Liam.
Those that played any part in the murder of our children will never ever get forgiveness. From top to bottom, MI5 to the associates of the attacker, we will always believe that you all played a part in the murder of our children.
For his part, MI5's Director General made a statement but refused to take questions from the media.
Had we managed to seize the slim chance we had, those impacted might not have experienced such appalling loss and trauma. I am profoundly sorry that MI5 did not prevent the attack.
Now, I share the sorrow that MI5 have expressed that this wasn't prevented. And I know that all of us are working to make sure that the improvements that need to be made are made.
The inquiry also looked at how Salman Abedi changed from when he grew up in the Libyan community on these streets in South Manchester, turning from what his former head teacher called a feckless, lazy good-for-nothing into a killer.
There's no way Salman did this on his own. Salman would have had to have been very carefully groomed and moulded.
Sir John's report made a series of recommendations about how schools, prisons and the security services can help prevent troubled children turning into terrorists. Today marks the end of a process which began on the 22nd of May 2017 and has provided answers for those who lost loved ones. Loved ones like Kelly Brewster, who went to see Ariana Grande with her niece Holly and her sister Claire.
It is definitely closing a chapter, but I can't say that we'll ever move on.
Phil McCann, BBC Northwest Tonight.
We're going to hear more from some of the bereaved families in just a moment, but one of the questions that this report today has tried to answer is who or what radicalised Salman Abedi and drove him to murder 22 people in his home city. BBC Radio Manchester's Matt Trewern, who attended almost every day of the public inquiry's hearings, has this report.
Salman Abedi, born and raised in Manchester. At the age of 22, he would walk through a crowded arena foyer and detonate a homemade bomb packed with shrapnel. His aim was to kill as many people, including children, as possible. It was a murderous plot he planned alongside his younger brother, Hashim.
Salman Abedi grew up here in South Manchester, and some believe he was born into the world of Islamist extremism and that the seeds of his radicalisation were sown early in life.
Abedi's parents, both Libyan, had fled to the UK during Colonel Gaddafi's regime. His father, Ramadan, was widely reported to have been part of the Libyan Islamic fighting group, and authorities believe he strongly influenced Salman Abedi's extremist views. In 2011, he took 16-year-old Salman and 14-year-old Hashem to Libya during the civil war, where it's thought they may have fought alongside militias.
Being involved in a conflict zone is likely to instigate a degree of trauma. They would have seen things, experienced things that we wouldn't normally expect, especially young teenagers, to go through in the United Kingdom. But also, alongside that, we see a normalisation of violence.
Another strong family influence may have come from Salman Abedi's older brother Ismail, who was said to have had an unhealthy interest in the group calling itself Islamic State. He fled the UK to avoid answering the inquiry's questions.
As a teenager, Salman Abedi was involved in gangs and drugs, but politics and religion were never far away. He knew people from these neighbourhoods who had fought and died for the group calling itself Islamic State, and he had friends who supported extremism.
One lifelong friend was convicted terrorist organiser Abdul Rauf Abdallah. Experts believe Abdallah was a major influence in grooming Abedi, something he denies.
Not me or my friends or anyone had any idea what was going on in Salman's head.
In the years leading up to the bombing here at the arena, the group calling itself Islamic State had inspired and carried out terror attacks all over the world. And in a prison confession, Hashim Abedi admitted the atrocity here in Manchester was in support of the militant group.
There's absolutely no doubt that they were inspired, at the very least, by this worldview of the so-called Islamic State and its strategic objectives to cause mayhem in the West.
Almost 6 years after the attack, only Salman and Hashim Abedi are known to have been involved. But there's a strong belief by some of the bereaved families that the two brothers did not act alone, and that others still need to be brought to justice for murdering their loved ones. Matt Trewern, BBC Northwest Tonight.
We heard at the start of the programme the anger that some of the families feel, many of the families feel, over the failings over the 3 reports that we've heard. Many of them attended virtually every day of the public inquiry for the 18 months that it went on at Manchester Magistrates Court. They described what they heard today as deeply painful but eye-opening. Katie Barnfield's outside the court where the public inquiry took place. She's been talking to many of them today. Katie.
Well, Roger, obviously it was an incredibly difficult day for all of the families who lost loved ones in the attack, many of whom spent hours inside the court here today listening to Sir John Saunders' findings. And some of them came out to speak afterwards. And despite the amount of press who had gathered here today, everyone fell silent to listen to them. There was a real mix of emotion in what they had to say. You heard there in Phil's report from Caroline Curry, the mother of Liam Curry, who expressed a lot of anger on behalf of her family about all the ways in which Liam had been failed, whereas Figan Murray, Martin Hett's mum, spoke about wanting to move forward and hoping that lessons would be learned. Well, afterwards, I spoke to June Tron, who lost her son Philip in the attack, and I asked her how she felt when she heard that finding that MI5 had missed a significant chance to prevent the attack.
So it gets you angry and bitter, but I'm past a lot of that now. I've had to because I've got family at home, you know, and you've got to think of them now because it must have pulled on them over the last 5.5 years. It's another chapter. It's closed.
Do you feel like you've got any justice?
No, I don't think so.
Well, we also heard outside court here from Richard Scorer from the law firm Slater and Gordon, who've been representing 11 of the families through this inquiry. And he came out and read a statement on their behalf, flanked by many of them. And I asked him about the recommendations that had been made, particularly those that won't be made public because of national security concerns, and whether he and the families have confidence that they will be followed.
The responsibility for ensuring that recommendations are implemented will be with the Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliament. And obviously, because those recommendations will be given in closed form to that committee, we can't necessarily be sure about the extent of implementation, but we will be doing everything we can, and we will be assiduous in ensuring that Parliament does what it needs to do.
Well, Sir John Saunders acknowledged today that he may well have created more questions for the victims in his final report, but said he can only hope it will achieve something.
Katie, thank you very much indeed. At the start of Katie's report, I mentioned that many of the families had been to every day of the public inquiry. One of those people who'd been to almost every day was Figan Murray. Her son, Martin Hett, was one of the 22 people who was murdered. Figan has made her mission one of forgiveness and of tolerance. She's worked hard to spread that message in the last few years. And Annabelle Tiffin has spent some time with Figan at her home in Cheshire.
Anger was actually never on my radar at all, right from the word go. Given his young age, I felt that actually, you know, he was not born as a terrorist. At such a young age, somebody put these ideas in his head. So it wasn't, the real culprit for me was always the ideology, not the person.
And it's interesting when you talk about forgiveness. I mean, as a mum myself, and I sort of think if I was ever in your situation, I don't know if I'd have the strength to forgive. How do you find the strength?
But you know what, forgiveness is not for the benefit of the terrorists, it was for my benefit. It stopped me. It's almost, forgiveness is almost protection from bitterness and hate and all those negative emotions.
How soon after Martin's death did you realise the path that you were going to go down, the path of, I suppose, forgiveness and tolerance?
During the first year, I didn't do anything at all because I was heavily grieving. I was not able to do much. But it was the day after the anniversary, I remember coming downstairs telling my husband, now the anniversary is over, I feel I can breathe again, I need to go. I have this really strong urge to go to school children and talk to them about radicalisation. I don't want other people to do this.
And a lot of radicalisation, a high percentage, actually happens online.
And that's what she's done.
She now speaks at conferences and schools across the country about signs of radicalisation.
Do you think if somebody is already, unfortunately, going down that route of being radicalised, that anything you say can change, can stop that?
Yes. So I, by the end of this week, will have spoken to 25,000 young people. And I will continue to do so because I think it's really important. But it would be amazing if one day a school would contact me afterwards and say, after your talk, we had a young person come forward and we are helping that person to get the support they need. That would be, even for that one person, a measure of success.
Last year, Figen received an OBE at Buckingham Palace for her work in counter-terrorism. She's campaigned tirelessly for Martin's Law, which would mean greater security at public venues. And in December, in a personal call from the Prime Minister on Martin's 35th birthday, she was told it will finally happen.
If you look back at all the things that you've done, the directions you've taken, what are you most proud of?
Probably achieving Martin's Law, but we're not quite there yet.
Very close now.
We're closer,
Yeah.
much closer than we have been. There's still a way to go, and as I said to the Prime Minister, I actually apologised to him in the phone call, saying, unfortunately, until the legislation is properly in, I will have to continue the pressure on the government. Once I think that the proud moment is not here yet, it will be when the legislation is properly out there.
What do you think Martin would have made of the work that you've done?
He'd probably be quite surprised that his shy mother would be out there talking to people, but I think he'd understand why I would do it.
Figen Murray there talking to Annabelle. Figen's here on the roof with us in Manchester this evening. Thank you for coming out, especially because it's so cold. Obviously you recorded that with Annabelle before you'd seen today's report.
Mm-hmm.
What's your reaction to what you've read?
Well, on the way in today, I was thinking about what to expect, and I expected, just like Volume 1 and 2, failures and mistakes being unearthed, and that's exactly what happened again in Volume 3.
We heard from some of the other families. I know, as I said at the beginning, tolerance and forgiveness has been very much your buzzword since the first anniversary, really. Do you feel angry?
No.
No.
No, I don't, because as I keep saying, Martin was a really, really positive person. He was full of joy and he loved life and he loved people. And I don't want to be angry in the spirit of Martin, because I would do him an injustice. It would feel as if I kind of contaminate his very essence. But I feel that anger for me is not an option, because I want to move forward and make something good of what happened, and the only way I can do it is by staying positive.
You talked today, and your husband Stuart talked today about this being the end of the first chapter as far as you're concerned, and there is more. Annabelle touched on it again in the report, which is the protect duty, which requires venues of different sizes to put more security in place. Are you confident that the government will deliver that?
Oh yes, definitely. I've had a meeting with Suella Braverman and Tom Tugendhat in December, and that followed on 3 days later. I had a phone call with Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, and with those two meetings we had the green light from the government, and it doesn't mean the legislation is in yet. There's still some parliamentary processes to go through, but we can now see the end of the tunnel, so definitely it's going to go ahead.
And I suppose if somebody is really determined, could that stop something like what happened in 2017 from happening again?
No, Martin's Law, I need to be very clear about that. Martin's Law is never going to stop all terrorist attacks. If there are bad people, they'll find a way. However, what Martin's Law will do is it'll raise the awareness in the general public. It'll make security a mandatory legislation for venues. So what it'll do is it'll reduce massively the amount of opportunities terrorists will have. It'll be a deterrent, and people will put measures in place to keep the public safe.
Do you have any idea finally when that might finally become law?
Don't know, because there are a few processes still to go through. The draft legislation will be presented in early spring. and then there's a 2-month period of scrutiny, and then it goes back and forth between the houses. So it's, I don't know, but I'm convinced that it'll happen by next year.
Thank you for talking to us. As always, we're very grateful to you. Figen Murray there, talking to us live here in Manchester tonight. Salman Abedi attended a mosque in Didsbury Mosque. It was said in the report today that that wasn't an active factor in his radicalisation. However, it was critical and said that perhaps they turned a blind eye to some of the political goings-on inside the mosque. And also the chair of the mosque was said to have been slightly less than helpful in some of the evidence, or certainly could have been more helpful in some of the evidence that he gave. His name is Hazi Hafar, and he spoke exclusively at the mosque to our social affairs correspondent, Abby Jones.
Salman Abedi detonated his murderous bomb several miles from the leafy suburb of Didsbury. But it soon emerged he and his family had worshipped at the mosque here. His father had performed the call to prayer. The mosque's trustees and its teachings came under intense worldwide scrutiny. And from some victims' families, intense condemnation. Today's report found the mosque didn't cause Abedi to become radicalised, but it did fail to address highly charged political debate, and that was weak leadership. Before its publication, its chair of trustees, whose own evidence was questioned, invited us in to address some of the criticisms.
Do you think that there will be people who hold more extreme views here, and that wasn't addressed, it was just easier to ignore it?
We will have the main Friday prayer today. We will have up to 1,100 people. We do not know them. I do not know everyone who attends this mosque.
Do you think you should know who's coming into your doors?
How
You should
can
be
we know?
listening to what they're saying and confronting anything that is radical.
How can we know? I would love to know. I am so sorry. If we had known that Salman Abedi was a radical, if we were told by the security services or were warned by the police, please watch out for this person, I would have done anything to prevent what happened. Anything. Our beliefs and our ethics are British. We are British Muslims. My children could have been at the arena. There were Muslim children at the arena. What that person, Salman Abedi, did was evil. And he definitely did not become radicalized by listening to a 10-minute sermon here.
The report says Abedi attended here for a lengthy period. The mosque maintains it was for Friday prayers, not smaller regular services. One of the imams told us there's been extra training and vetting and changes to sermons.
What we now do is to address subjects in our sermon related to our local community. There is a proper management system in place. Every sermon, every activity is well designed, well prepared.
Jihad for the sake of Allah is the source of pride and dignity for this nation.
After the bombing, a recording emerged of Friday prayers inside the mosque 6 months before Salman Abedi detonated his device. The sermon discussed the war in Syria and Iraq. 2 Muslim scholars said it referred to armed jihad, a meaning denied by the preacher and the mosque. Police and counter-terrorism police investigated, but found no offences had been committed.
So he was saying we have to struggle with our money, or we have to strive rather with our money. We have to go.
Not militarily, as some scholars have said it was.
Well, we suspended the imam, and we investigated his sermon. So did the police, and so did the Charity Commission. We've tightened on the policies. We've made sure that any group meetings are always under our supervision.
How do you feel about the security services? Were you ever told anything about Abedi?
We were never told anything about Abedi. The counter-terrorism unit never came to us and said to us, please watch out, this person is this or this person is that. I do feel that this centre is being used as a scapegoat. I really do feel that.
So they just put all these here.
Despite the many criticisms, the mosque has many supporters, especially in the local community, which it helps. But staff feel that work has been overshadowed.
We've had letters, we had some far-right activists who came. We had an arson attack. The congregation and the community doesn't deserve this. And I know it's nothing compared to the families, because I could never, ever, ever understand how that must feel. And all I can say to them, you know, is we're there with you.
What do you want to happen now?
Okay, we want to really put this behind us. But again, I cannot put everything that's happened behind me. 22 victims have gone. I cannot forget about them. I'm hoping that when this inquiry is over, the victims' parents, friends will actually see things in a different way and they'll have closure.
But the conclusions of today's report and the enduring hurt and loss mean that seems unlikely. Abby Jones, BBC North West Tonight, Didsbury.
There are a couple of things just to point out to you online on BBC Sounds and on the BBC iPlayer with more detail on the Manchester Arena terror attack. If you go online onto BBC Sounds and search there is a documentary going on tonight, as you can see, and on BBC iPlayer over the weekend a full documentary called Homegrown Terrorist will be available to view. As Annabelle said to Figa Murray earlier in the programme, none of us can really know if we'd lost a loved one on that night, whether we would have the capacity to forgive. I remember reporting on those events in 2017, that night and the days which followed in St Anne's Square when the whole of this city came together in solidarity. That's something that I will never forget. And of course, there are many people who were directly involved in what happened on the night who will carry those memories with them forever. Sir John Saunders and his inquiry team have been critical of organisations and individuals, none of whom fell willfully short. But ultimately, what happened on the 22nd of May 2017 was about one man, a murderous man who brought his terror to this city. As Sir John Saunders said, it was an appalling loss that was so unnecessary. How right he was. From all of us, good night.
Please don't let my daughter be a victim.
He was just unique, wasn't he? He was just very, very characterful and he just loved life.
What the families have gone through, and it just being such young children.
This has been the most horrific incident we have ever faced here in Greater Manchester, and one that we all hoped we would never see.
It's heartbreaking. It's just children.
We're thinking about them, and they won't be forgotten.
But we won't take defeat, and we don't want your pity, because this is the place where we stand strong together with a smile on our face, Mancunians forever.